I'm Katrina McKeever and I'm here with Mary Kay at the home of Mary Stewart in Collington Road in Edinburgh. And Mary's going to tell us about her time teaching at George Watson's College. But before you do that, Mary, can you tell us a little bit about yourself and where you came from and how you came to be in Edinburgh teaching in George Watson's College?
Right. Well, I was born on Speyside, near the fastest flowing river in the country, and in a place called Ballandalloch, which is now very famous because of the Ballandalloch Castle and the owners there who have brought in a lot of people, and people can now visit the castle, which none of us were able to do when I was a little girl. But I went to school, just to the little local school in Ballandalloch, and Ballandalloch is actually a place where the Aberdeen Angus herd started. But I went to the local school, and then I went to Aberlour Secondary School. I was a trained pupil, and I went right through from primary 3 right through to Highers, and I enjoyed school very much, really. But I'd always thought I really wanted to be a teacher, so I was accepted for teaching in training college in Aberdeen, and enjoyed that very much. And after some years, you apply for jobs, not like nowadays. You applied for a job and you knew that you would get a job. So I applied for 1 or 2 places, including Fife. But the Director of Education for Angus came up and interviewed some of us, and I had a friend who lived in Montrose, and I thought it might be good to go down to that area, somewhere where I'd never been. So the Director of Education interviewed us and told me that he would be very glad to employ me, and that he would give me the plum of the county, which was the first infant class at Arbroath High School. That's how old I am, you see, now I forget these things. Arbroath High School. And this was a fee-paying school, lovely school, and I was very happy to be there. I wasn't wanted really at the beginning, but when you're young, you know, ignorance is bliss, and you just carry on and do what you can. But there's some very nice people on the staff. They really had someone local lined up for it, but here was somebody from the north, and they wondered what possessed me to go down there. Well, I suppose I wanted to spread my wings a bit. So I taught there for 8 years, and as happened later on in George Watson's, I was linked to a big school which had a music department, and I had the privilege of teaching young children, doing a lot of singing and choir work, which was wonderful. But I had come down to Montrose, and I was introduced to a certain gentleman called Murray Stewart, who had just gone into the ministry. And I went to hear him one night out of sheer curiosity, see how he was getting on. And so that was the start. We met one another after some years. I'd seen him before, but we didn't really get on. We didn't care for one another at all. However, this seemed to be different. So after a time we became engaged, and we were engaged for 3 years, after which we were married and went to Rosewell. And of course in those days married women didn't really teach, but I was asked to do a weekend, 2 weeks here and 2 weeks there, and after a few months I was pregnant with our first child, and in those days you left about 3 months before. So I was in Goldbridge, and then I went to Lastwade Primary, where I had the privilege of doing music as well as various other things, and entering festivals, for the choirs for the festival, and the competitive festival in Edinburgh, and that was wonderful. And but then I had another baby, and I thought that would be the end of my teaching. But my mother-in-law, who stayed with us, she said she was willing to do the home support, And so I then spent 4 years in Lasswade Primary School. But then we were moving into Edinburgh, and I wasn't allowed to go back to Lasswade after the baby was born, but I was sent to Dander Hall, and that was quite near Rosewell by bus. But when we came into Edinburgh, it was equally easy to go back to Dander Hall on the bus from Edinburgh, which I did. But one night I saw an advertisement for a job at George Watson's College, and coming from the country in the north, you had no idea about Edinburgh schools. But I applied for George Watson's College, but I had to get in touch with previous headmasters, and they were very kind and responded and said some very nice things. And 1 week later, I was informed that they would like to see me. But then I discovered that this wasn't for the real interview. This was with the head of the junior school, and this was in the time when you went for your interview. I don't know if I did this time or not. I did the next time for the main interview, but this gentleman conducted me round the primary school in George Watson's College, and he very sensitively, I wondered why, I didn't know at the time why he was seeing me and not the headmaster and not having the big interview. But he spent 2 hours with me on a very dull November day, taking me around the school and talking about teaching and what I had done and what I thought about various things. And then I realised that he was very sensitively finding out if I might be likely to stay there for a time, because I already had 2 children. I can't remember how we got round that, but I don't remember being embarrassed, and I hope he wasn't. But then I was asked to go for a main interview with a headmaster and a convener from the merchant company. I don't know how many people were there. And I went dressed in a suit with a hat on. By this time it was acceptable that married women could be employed, but I was all dressed for the occasion. And the first thing that the headmaster, famous, wonderful man, Roger Young, said to me, "Of course you start at a disadvantage, because your son is at Heriot's." However, a few days later I was given the job of Watson's, and I went to teach primary 1.
To your previous school?
Yes, it was. Fortunately, I had become used not to teach, not to hearing, reading right round the class, which is what we did in our Arbroath. That's what used to happen. By this time, I had learned to do individual reading. But this was a relatively new thing for me, but it seemed to work out. That was fine. But there were great differences, looking back now, when we started doing the reading and sounds and the numbers, teaching numbers, and we did writing, of course, and I've always been very fond of writing, and it's not easy for every child to write, I know, because one of mine found writing very difficult, and he was sent home with a book to practice every night. So I was very sensitive about this part of the thing, and it was very difficult for these children because we didn't have big sheets of paper for people to draw on and exercise their hands and their fingers, practicing painting or doing other things, or doing patterns with their hands, so that the muscles would become used to writing. They had ordinary pencils, books with very, very narrow lines, and it was just so difficult, and gradually the lines became slightly bigger, and then eventually you went on to another book with a red line on it, and so they were still learning how to write, but it struck me as being very strange. And then I realised later on that we were starting at the very wrong place, because when children are young, they need space and they need everything big. They need big sheets of paper, and you gradually work down until they have the control that they discover that it's easier to do writing. And so that was one of the main things that I remember that I felt was very difficult for them. But and here was a big school, of course, with a music department, and it wasn't long before I became involved with help from the staff in doing shows in the big hall with little 5- and 6-year-olds. It's incredible now, but the children were just wonderful. They really, they backed you very much. And some of the teachers there had taught there all their lives. One of them had taught there from the year I was born in 1926. And so I didn't realise when I was asking for children from the various classes that I was really upsetting what people did, but nobody said anything. They didn't complain. And so I had several glorious years there. And eventually another lady came from the north. This was still the days when you didn't have a first name, you were Mrs. And the junior headmaster said, now there's a lassie from Malig has just come and you'll need to look after her. Well, we became friends right away, and we are friends still to this day. And after that, it was a glorious era to be there. It was just brilliant, and I couldn't have wished for anything better. And I was able to stay there until, and doing music with primary 1, 2 and 3, because we didn't have a big music department at that time. It was a very good, but of course it's marvellous now. The music's always been great at Watson's. So that was another extra that I was allowed to practice, and I enjoyed it thoroughly.
Music's always been part of your life, Mary, hasn't it?
Yes, it has. My father got me a piano when I was about 9 or 10, and I had 2 brothers. My stepbrother, who was a very good violinist, and he had a band and he played various instruments, and then my brother, he played the violin as well. We both started instruments at the same time, and while he went on to do his violin and develop that, I did a lot of well, I got lessons from the time I was 10, but unfortunately the lady who took us wrote a letter to say that she was sorry. I realise now that she was terminally ill. She only had me for six months, but she had me playing hymns before I thought there was anything difficult or anything about that. But I was then transferred to another lady who was not quite so pleasant, and she was renowned for losing her temper and for hitting people over the fingers with a ruler. But I think she only tried that once with me, and then she was very good to me, and in a way she didn't really develop me as far as I realise now I could have done, but I enjoyed all the music I was doing. And then I was asked to play the organ in the church, which I'd never touched, but the elders thought I should play the organ, which the organist was ill, and so I started playing the organ. I was never a professional organist, but I have played the organ over the years when necessary. But I went back to piano lessons later on when I was teaching in Arbroath until I ran out of time. So, but I've always enjoyed music, and I've been I've just been in pastures green, I think, because I've had every opportunity to enjoy myself.
It was just boys when you started teaching,
yes.
and the day was quite different, wasn't it?
I think we stopped at, yes, I was in the boys' college, and we stopped at, I think we stopped at 1 o'clock, and we actually worked all afternoon, and we might be asked to go and teach in other classes further up school, although we didn't do so much of that as the girls did, and we amalgamated in 1974, and that added to the enjoyment. It was just a lovely time to be there, and we were far apart from the girls' college in ideas and in methods, but we all had to sacrifice something, but we all learned from one another, and older people like me learned from all the young girls who came, and they introduced some new ideas. And while we were we eventually had a modern school, you know, where we didn't have partitioned between all the classes, but it was very purposeful and very helpful. It was very enriching because you could see what other people were doing in their classes, and I think that helped us to grow even at that stage in our teaching. It was a very, very good time.
And when we amalgamated in 1974, that was the start of a whole different kind of teaching, wasn't it, Mary? Because we joined with, the girls came over and we had this open plan building, and you were very heavily involved in teaching music.
Yes.
In those days. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, yes, it was wonderful, because at any one time, well, every week, well, I did music with primary 1, 2 and 3, I think, at different times, but also we did some extra, we also always did a nativity presentation of some kind in the lower primary building. It was an open plan building, lovely hall, and my boss and friend at the time, she was very good at putting on these nativity presentations, and they were different each year, but they were really quite ambitious, I think I realise now, but the children responded every time. And at the Christmas play, I mean, all the parents came, and they all said that this is when their Christmas started, when we did the Christmas nativity play or presentation. My boss, Miss Dilber, she had great, wonderful ideas, and it was lovely to try to carry them out. And then there was the odd occasion when we all gathered in the hall, and I had prepared the children, about 300 children of the first 3 years, to sing various songs. And one of the times we did a fundraising half hour for Marie Curie, and that was all recorded and videoed as well. And they were just wonderful, because you didn't have to say, and now we will do this, and now we will do that. It would be so boring. I just played the introduction, and the children came in, singing solos sometimes, others just choir, but they were just marvellous. And then the last year I was there, I thought I was going to retire in 1986, but I found myself retiring in 1985, the same year as our wonderful headmaster, Roger Young. And there was a special week of celebrations at the end of that, called Feast Week. And there were all different kinds of things to celebrate, just celebrate the life of the school. And again, we did a half-hour programme, same sort of thing, called Sing a Rainbow. And the same again, I just played the piano and the children just joined in. And a lot of parents came to that as well. And after I left to go abroad, because I went to Switzerland with my husband for 8 years, I went abroad, and it was very difficult leaving the children, leaving friends, but after I got there, I was sent 2 copies of a video of the actual singing, and it's just lovely to see the children in them, and they were so responsive. So it was a wonderful life.
Mary, have you got any, if you were advising anyone going into teaching today, what would you say to them?
I would say that if it were possible, it would be very helpful, as well as going to college, if they could have a short time going into a school and actually having teaching practice and learning. Because when I started, I didn't do my first year at the college in Aberdeen. There was a scheme then that you could do your first year of training in your own home school. And so I was very fortunate, as there were 2 of us went from Aberlour secondary school, and we were very fortunate because we had a term with an infant teacher who was first class. We had a term with the junior class. The teacher also, I didn't know her so well, but she was so good. And the next term was what was then called the qualifying class, now in primary 7. And it was, but we didn't realise how fortunate we were. But that was the last year that happened. Now we had to do crit lessons, and the teachers advised us, and they would give us a criticism as well. And every term the headmaster came and listened, and he also gave you a criticism. And so when we went into Aberdeen, I think we thought that we would be at a disadvantage. But as a matter of fact, we weren't. We'd had a year's advantage, but some of the girls didn't, who were following this scheme, because they didn't get the benefit of all the training that we'd had, and all that we'd just absorbed just by watching and hearing and listening. They hadn't had this. They would go for a roll for the headmaster for his coffee and do messages and that sort of thing. And so it was unsuccessful in many places, and so they stopped that. But I think that was of great benefit to us. And when it came to the end of there's always prizes, and none of us who had been in that scheme that we'd had ever expected to be even considered for it. But 3 of the 4 people who were chosen, 3 of them were from the scheme that we had followed, where we did a year at school. And we thought that the other girl, because she'd been there all the time, would obviously get it, but no, there were 3 of us, and one who had done the year in whether it was chance or not, I'm not very sure, but that proved very successful. Okay.
How do you think that your teaching changed from being in the boys' school and the open plan school?
Well, I think we had to learn again, and we were encouraged because we'd seen it in another school like this down in England. You didn't ever speak out loudly to the children, and they weren't just to call you or shout at you from a distance. They had to come to you if they wanted to speak to you, and you went to them. Or you would always have a quiet voice, and because it was a semi-open plan school, you didn't want to be disturbing other teachers, and so we were all encouraged. It was quieter. Not that I ever taught in a raucous loud school or anything, but that was certainly one thing that we had to learn. And different methods. I mean, the children just didn't sit in rows in desks. We had tables, and your room was perhaps changed every week, and you would have themes and follow the themes, and that was it was all very enriching, and you could learn from other people. You could see what they were doing, and we all discussed it. We were like one family, actually, and I don't know if that's a good enough explanation, but that's really what happened.
And do you feel that the teaching, the kind of teaching that we did in those days has changed today, or do you feel that the emphasis has moved away from?
I don't know, because
the 3 R's, as it were.
I don't know what it's like now. I hear and see certain things that I don't agree with, but then you could say that perhaps because I'm older, but I think you have to think what is the best thing for the children. I don't know enough about what goes on these days. I think teachers still work very hard, but I really don't know. I couldn't really criticise. I don't know well how what's going on nowadays.
Well, Mary, it's been just lovely hearing all your reminiscences. Don't
take me.
And thank you very much, and maybe we'll come back and hear some more another time.
Well, I'd like to see that's very nice, but I'm not used to this kind of thing.